I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and it's the last episode of 2022 being recorded on what is, at least on our part of the globe, the darkest day of the year. The winter solstice is today, and of course the Christmas holiday is coming up this weekend, and I hope you all have a wonderful one. I'm going to be off actually the week. I always usually take the week off between the holidays because in my line of business, Ben, nothing happens during that week, or nothing, at least nothing in North Dakota. So I usually take that week off. It's a good week for me to take off, but there won't be any podcasts or any columns or anything for me next week.
It's a good, it's like school break. It's a nice time to do stuff in between. I used to be in sales and nothing ever happened between Christmas and New Year's unless it was tax related.
My kids are home. My wife's a teacher. She's home. It's just a good time to be home. Anyway, but before we take all this time off, we got a little work to do today. And joining us is Senator Brad Bekkedahl. He's a Republican. He is from out west. He's from the Williston area, and he's also the new chairman of the Appropriations Committee. Now, in the past, first of all, Senator Bekkedahl, welcome to the program. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here. I
have often described the chairs of the Appropriations Committee as two of the most powerful political figures in the state that you've never heard of. This is a very consequential position you've been appointed to, and I wanted to first of all, just get your reflection on that. I mean, this is a big deal taking over this seat, and the person who held it previously was there for a long time. I'm not remembering off the top of my head how long Senator Ray Holmberg from Grand Forks, who didn't run for re-election, how long he held the chairmanship specifically, but he was in the legislature for well over 40 years. You're taking over. You're a new face in a big job.
Well, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'm really honored that the leader has the confidence in me, Leader Hogue, to place me in this position. And I wouldn't be here without the mentorship of Ray Holmberg, to be honest with you. Ray, when he brought me on appropriations, took me under his wing and really taught me a lot of things, gave me a lot of consequential bills to work on, a lot of strong conference committees with the House. Really, I think, built the resume for me to even be an applicant for this position in the eyes of the leader. So I'm fortunate to be here, honored, but at the same time, a little bit overwhelmed by the duties that are put before me. I think we'll do well. I've got a lot of background in not just policy and politics, but in finance as well. So I think I'm up for the task. And again, just honored to be here.
Senator Bekkedahl, Ben Hanson here. Good to be talking to you again here. Now you are in. Oh, what'd you say?
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well. And I hope. I'm assuming the weather's just every bit as cold up there in Williston.
It is. Yep. Yeah, we're all freezing.
We're all freezing. But so Senator Bekkedahl, are you in your second term now as a state senator?
This is actually, I'll be starting my third term in January 1st. So I was initially elected in 2014, and my first session was in 2015. Right.
Oh, yeah, that's so right.
I've 4 sessions and 2 more to go.
So can you, and I apologize, that's right. You being in your third term and becoming a chair isn't all that surprising, but can you walk folks who don't live and breathe this through the process? Building off of what Rob said, sometimes appropriations, they tend to be, the chairs of appropriations tend to be the 2 most important political players, as he said, that you've never heard of before. Really, truly, every bill that has any kind of dollar amount goes through appropriations. And a lot of times I find in my time working with business associations, working with nonprofits that try and shepherd legislation through that don't necessarily live and breathe the legislative process, they don't quite understand, or they get shocked by where the Appropriations Committee gets inserted. Can you kind of put it in layman's terms for folks that aren't familiar with the legislative process?
Yeah, so what really happens is we have certain thresholds in the legislative process that have been adopted by rules by both the Senate and House. Some are single rules to the chamber and some are joint rules. But we have a joint rule that actually sets apart how much money in a bill has a bill going to the Appropriations Committee.
And we just
literally changed those thresholds. They used to be lower. Now we've changed them because of the size of the budgets we're seeing are increasing so phenomenally, and the size of the spending and the size of the bills we're seeing. So it used to be that if you had a $50,000, it is now that if you have a $50,000 direct appropriation in your bill, that's going to be referred to the Appropriations Committee for a recommendation for the floor to vote on. And if you have a $200,000 threshold or above of a fiscal note, which is the analysis of what it's going to cost to put that bill into play, then the bill goes to the Appropriations Committee. So the bill may have started in a Finance and Tax Committee or a Political Subdivisions Committee, but if it hits any of those thresholds, either from a direct appropriation of money or a fiscal note in the analysis by the Tax Department, then it's going to be referred to Appropriations after you've gone through the hearing process in your Policy Committee.
So folks know, when the bill first starts, it gets assigned to one of these 10 topic committees, basically, judiciary, transportation, so on. Then is it that the floor votes on it, but it still goes back to appropriations, or it goes through appropriations after that committee? And can appropriations kill that bill?
So what happens is the once it reaches those thresholds, it's gone through the process in the Policy Committee, it will get re-referred on the floor to the Appropriations Committee for a recommendation on the bill because of its fiscal note. The original committee may have a recommendation on their vote on the bill, which may be positive or negative for the floor to look at, but the Appropriations Committee will be the final committee recommendation that the floor sees before they vote on the final bill. And that's usually a recommendation for or recommendation against.
But that's still a recommendation. You couldn't take the bill and then kill it because you as a committee deem that it costs too much.
No, exactly. So North Dakota is really unique in this process, and most people don't know this either. I think we're probably the only state that does this. Every bill that gets introduced, whether it's in the House or the Senate, has to have an assignment to a committee, has to have a public hearing in that committee, and has to then go to a floor vote. So we don't have any committee powers here to take bills and essentially put them in a closet and never see them again and never take them to the floor. Every bill has to have a hearing and has to have a floor vote.
Senator Bekkedahl, my sense of the Appropriations Committee has always been a sort of place of reconciliation where you have all these different bills. Some of them are just outright budgets, right? They're just appropriations bills. Some of them are policy bills that are directing an appropriation because we want to create a new, program or something somewhere in the vast reaches of our state government. But someone ultimately has to add all that up and to make sure that it's coming out and that what we're appropriating through these various bills is reconciled with what we expect to take in terms of revenue. Is that understanding correct of what the appropriations job is?
That's a perfect explanation, Rob. So actually, taking a little bit from what Ben's question was earlier, the first 2 weeks of hearings, which are already set for our Appropriations Committee, are agency budgets. So they don't go to a policy committee. Their budgets, like for the governor's office, the secretary of state's office, constitutional offices, the adjutant general, the highway department, all of those things, water resources. The first 2 weeks of hearings in the appropriations in the Senate will be solely hearings before the full committee on all of those budgets. And then after that, once the policy committees have done their work, we'll start to see bills coming in from the policy committees that have been referred to appropriations. So, but what really happens and what my role is and what the role of Representative Don Bekkedahl in the House as their appropriations chairman and chair is basically to make sure that we follow all the processes required by law to get the bills assigned into our appropriations committees, get them the hearing formats that they need, get the votes of the committee to the floor for the recommendations, and let the floor take action. And in the meantime, we're going to be in the background keeping track with the majority leaders in both chambers on what the overall spending is. Every week we get an update on how many spending requests are there, how much revenue is projected to come in, and how much we're either over or under those thresholds. So we'll be monitoring that, and we're ultimately taking us to the end of the session so we have a fully balanced budget for the state, which is required by the Constitution.
And can the average citizen be monitoring that as that happens in the state legislative during the legislative session?
There are reports that come out every week that I know the Appropriations Committee sees, and I think the full chamber has access to those as well. I used to get them as a policy person, so I know that they're accessible. I don't know where they're accessible. I'll try to find that out for you, though, and see if we can make that happen.
I think that'd be
just a simple report. That's part of transparency, but it's a simple report, and it just shows where you're over and under for that time in the session.
I'm pretty sure they're posted on the legislative website when they come out, although with the new website, I'm not sure where. So I'm going to have to track that down again. Senator Bekkedahl, one thing, we're talking about balancing policy with revenue. We're going to have in this session, I think probably one of the biggest debates is going to be between two big tax relief proposals. One is focused on property taxes, using the legacy fund to try to buy down or replace some of that property tax burden. The other is coming out of the governor's office, obviously with some support from a group of lawmakers in terms of an income tax proposal. With your committee, and obviously with your counterparts in the House, is going to be central to that debate. Can you give us some insight into how you're seeing that, obviously before it begins?
Yeah, what I'll tell you is that both the leaders and Representative Bekkedahl and I have had the opportunity to meet with the governor on some of the specifics about that income tax relief. And he makes a very compelling case that it is a better way of actually getting tax relief to the citizens than the property tax relief has been in the past. We have spent literally billions of dollars in property tax relief over all the years that we've been able to do that. And the point we hear from the public is, well, you pass something and it's tax relief that day, but it doesn't flow through because other taxing entities take up the space with increasing their budgets, and then we never really see any relief. So the governor's point is that income tax relief is solely controlled by the state. When we do that, nobody else can replace it, and that's the best tax relief mechanism. I would tell you that as legislators, what we hear from the public is property tax is a larger issue. And I have my own personal views on that, and I believe that because I've seen it as well. I think when I sit down and write my check to the North Dakota State Tax Commissioner for my taxes, my income taxes for the year, and then I sit down at the end of the year and write my check to the county for my county tax statement, which is my property tax statement for the end of the year, for most citizens, which of those checks that you're writing are going to be bigger? It's going to be the property tax bill. So that's why I think people are talking about property tax as the most intrusive and abusive tax over income tax. So my personal feeling is we will let the chambers decide that through the policy committees. We'll let the appropriations committees. And by the way, that's my job as the chairman, is not to direct how the appropriations committee gets to a final recommendation. It's really up to the committee. I've got great membership on my committee, and I'm really confident they're going to make the best decisions they can in this area.
Senator Bekkedahl, I wanted to ask you, and it's relevant to now, where did you wind up falling on the term limits ballot measure here this last fall?
I told people that asked me about it, as long as and I've had this view as a city elected official too now for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the public is able to vote directly on any issue, I'm comfortable with that, because I think that's the best voting mechanism we have, is directly with the public. As we all know, it's difficult to do that with everything we do in life. It's just, there's just too many things you have to vote on. We have to at some point have representation that does that for us. But so I'm happy they had the opportunity to do it. My personal view is that I think there's going to be some hiccups in the final implementation. I look at the year 2030, and I look at an 8-year term limit. I never took this job to be here forever, and I never took this job thinking I'd even be here this long. I stepped up because people asked me, they thought I could help, and I was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're the legislature. We have turnover already that's 25 to 30% range. My view is we'll live through this. I'm not sure it's going to be good for the state. We might have to change some things, the way we do some things, to make sure we have people prepared to take the reins of leadership after only 1 or 2 years in the legislature.
Well, and I happen to agree with you on that stance, but the reason I brought it up was you are stepping in the shoes of now former Senator Ray Holmberg. And Ray Holmberg left quite a mark on the North Dakota political scene in multiple areas, in multiple directions. What I mean by that is he was the chair of appropriations, I want to say, for over 20 years. I just popped the legislative website, and he was the chair at least back to 2005. One of the arguments that people made when they were talking about term limits were figures like Ray Holmberg and even Jeff Delzer, who was the House Appropriations Chair, who held these chairmanships for what felt like in perpetuity in some people's eyes. Some people thought that was a very good thing. There were probably many people at the UND Law and Medical School that thought it was a very good thing that Ray Holmberg was there to make sure that there was funding there. But there were others on both sides. Do you foresee there being some kind of a need for a limitation on the time that you, or anyone else for that matter, would be a chair of what I would consider to be the most important committee in the legislature, as a public trust building exercise, or just as a good idea? Or do you feel there's more of an institutional knowledge issue there? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I've certainly appreciated the institutional knowledge that Ray Holmberg had. He was phenomenal in guiding the committee through a lot of issues that we had with that knowledge base. Personally, from my perspective, again, I got in the legislature at an age where I was never going to be in this position that long anyway. So for me, it's really not an issue. The 8 years, I'm comfortable with that, because I don't want to be doing this when I'm in my 70s or 80s. I want to be doing something different with my life. So, and that's always a good decision. I feel a little bit conflicted, though, in that the public no longer has the ability to vote for who they want to. If they wanted to keep somebody in longer than 8 years, that's a detriment to what we see here. But I'll tell you that now that you brought up the point, I really like what the House of Representatives on the Republican side has done in the past, where they limit the chairmanships to 2 or 3 terms. I think that's a good idea, and I think that's probably something that needs to be looked at with these 8-year terms. Is maybe you have a chairman that's only going to be there for 2 or 3 times. But in light of that, if we have 8-year terms now, 4 years goes by pretty fast. That's 2 terms as a chairmanship. You're not going to be in the position long enough to keep it much longer than that, in my mind, either.
I want to switch gears a little bit. We've seen over the past couple of years, past couple of cycles, sort of an opera play out between the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Jeff Delzer, who was not reelected to another term, and Governor Burgum. It has seemed at times that it's been a kind of hostile, kind of rocky relationship between the legislature and the governor's office. There's been lawsuits. There's been vendettas at the ballot box. And I wanted to speak. I mean, obviously, you were just referencing you meeting with the governor's office about, the income tax proposal. I mean, how do you have that working relationship? I mean, obviously, our system is designed for there to be some tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch. That's healthy. That's by design. Can you talk about like having a better relationship with the governor's office, or maybe you don't think there needs to be a better one?
Well, first of all, I totally believe in the constitutionality of the separation of powers between the judicial, executive, and legislative branches. And I also believe and this is statutory in our Constitution as well, that the legislature is the spending authority for the people of the state. So that's our charge and our task. The governor can make recommendations, and we need to look at that. I've told people that as a city official in the finance commissioner portfolio I've had for 26 years in Williston, we have a system that mirrors what the state does, where the agency head, which would be the mayor, and the city administrator go through the department heads and an extensive process build a budget recommendation for the commission to look at. The state does the same thing with the governor and the agencies and his cabinet. And I've always thought that we need to respect that process. There's an immense amount of effort put forward by these agencies and their employees to build the budget that they see that fits the needs of the public who they deal with every day. And because of that, we need to respect that process. And we do need to give it its due when we look at the considerations from the governor's budget. But at the same time, the legislature by law can have its own priorities, and we should. And it becomes a balance where the legislature does the public hearing process on the governor's recommendations as well as legislature priorities, and we make the decisions on the spending. So I think it's a good system. I think it's balanced well. My personal take is that I respect the governor's efforts, and it needs to be looked at. And, the old word, the art of compromise, probably needs to enter in occasionally to make the best decisions for the public.
Senator Bekkedahl, I got to ask a question. You are a senator from Williston, North Dakota, and we are now, and I am with Rob's, of course, sitting here in Minot. I am, of course, sitting here in Fargo, North Dakota. We now have legislative leadership that has shifted geographically, almost into, definitely more western in the western direction than it has before. We now have appropriations chairs in you and Representative Don Bekkedahl in Cooperstown. What do you have to say to concerns that may be raised about various, Garrison, FM diversion, the two biggest universities being UND and NDSU, and Grand Forks and Fargo? What would you say to those that would express concern? And I've heard it. I mean, I just want to say it to your face, for lack of a better term, and rather than say it around you, that there's a concern that there might not be as much emphasis put on infrastructure spending and policy towards the east, because those chairs simply do not, or those legislative members simply do not have the gavels in their hands. How would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I would tell you is that I don't think the chairmanship of the Appropriations Committee should have or does have that much power from what I've observed. They're really committee decisions, and the committee is pretty balanced. In fact, we have, I think, more Eastern legislators on my Appropriations Committee than we do West. The other thing is there has been a dominance of East over West for a long time, and that's been a little concern for the Western people, I will tell you, especially since the resource base, 53 to 55% of all total state revenues comes from basically 4 counties out in western North Dakota. So it's been a concern out here too. But we're having a balance, I think, in the state. We're growing, we're developing the resource base. The Bakken boom helped all of us out. It's helped the state tremendously. And we now have west of Bismarck, we now have 23 legislative districts, and east of Bismarck, we now have 24 legislative districts. So I think we're seeing that balance play out in the citizenry as well as in the legislature. I think it's a good thing. And I would to allay anybody's concerns, east or west, the decisions are made by committees, not by chairmen, and rarely by leadership from what I've seen in my past. It might look like that at some point in time, but the decisions are really made by committees. And I would allay those concerns and say we're going to make the best decisions for all of North Dakota. In fact, when I first ran for this position in 2014, the press asked me, "Why are you running for the legislature?" And I told them, and it's still true today, I hope to go to Bismarck to make good decisions for North Dakota that will also be good decisions for my district.
Just to speak to that, I was actually doing some work, and I haven't finished compiling my data because I was interested in what Ben was talking about, and I know just looking at some of the cities, for instance, Bismarck, Mandan, and again, just looking at the House, I haven't had a chance to look at the Senate, but Bismarck, Mandan elects 14 House seats. They have 3 lawmakers on appropriations, 5 chairs. Fargo, West Fargo has 20 seats in the legislature. They have 4 people on a Approps committee and 1 chair. Grand Forks has 8 seats in the legislature, 3 on appropriations committees, 0 chairs. Minot, where I'm from, has 8 seats in the legislature, 2 members of appropriations, and 3 chairmanships. So, I mean, that's how it's breaking down. But also
And the majority leader. Sorry.
And the majority leader. But it's in the Senate, Senate majority, David Hogue. But it's interesting how it's breaking down. But I think some of it's also the shift in our demographics in the state. I mean, the oil boom really changed the makeup of our state in a lot of ways that are very consequential. We've seen that during the redistricting process where some of that's moving. And also the Republicans control the chambers, but Fargo is one of the few places in the state that elects Democrats consistently. And it's hard to put the Republican majority's not going to put a Democrat in as a chair of a committee any more than a Democratic majority would put a Republican in as a chair of a committee. So, those are some of the things that I was playing with as I was exploring that issue. It's nuanced, suffice it to say.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the analysis about Fargo and Grand Forks it's no secret that Democratic districts exist out in eastern North Dakota more than western North Dakota. And so while the population is there, just because of that nuance, they're not going to get the number of chairmanships that other districts would across the state. So good point, Rob.
Senator, what do you think? You just mentioned talking about representing your constituents. How do you balance being the chair of appropriations and really that's a seat where your constituency is the entire state, right? I mean, that's you're trying to help guide that committee to make decisions that are best for the whole state. How do you balance that with serving the interests of your constituents specifically? I know, like Ben, for instance, talked about your predecessor, Ray Holmberg. I know there's probably a lot of people in Grand Forks who are very happy that one of their lawmakers was the chair of appropriations and in such an influential position so far. How does that balance work in your mind?
Well, I don't think it's anything different from when I was not a chair of appropriations. I place the bills that are important to my constituency into the mix. They go through the processes, the hearings, the public gathering. At the end of the day, there's a recommendation, and sometimes those bills come out successful and sometimes they don't. Just because I'm the chair of appropriations doesn't mean that my bills are going to get any less scrutiny than any others. In fact, probably will get more scrutiny just because of the position I hold. And I understand that. So because of that, I'll probably be doing fewer bills as a prime sponsor. I know that's for sure. Maybe even fewer as co-sponsors. But I'm really going to be looking out for the big picture and trying to keep in mind that I have a constituency that I have to also work for and work towards. But I rely on the bodies, the House and the Senate in total, to make the best decisions. And if I put forward good bills and they get good recommendations, that'll be good for my constituents as well.
Tammy Miller is going to be our brand new lieutenant governor. As we found out, or at least I found out very suddenly this week. And much like the United States Senate, where the Vice President of the United States presides over the Senate, in North Dakota, the Lieutenant Governor, and this is the case in most states, the Lieutenant Governor presides over the state Senate, essentially meaning they're a little bit of a referee, mostly calling things to order, not... I don't want to dismiss the consequence of the job, but it's not, I don't know if it's all that influential, but you have a brand new one to work with now in the state Senate. What did you think about the timing of the announcement? And what is your relationship with Tammy Miller? I mean, very frankly, if any, I don't know. What's your response to that?
Well, I'll tell you that Brent Sanford and I go back a long ways, with him being mayor of Watford City and me being involved in city government out here in Williston.
That makes sense.
Great friends, and he was a great lieutenant governor. I was surprised by the timing of the announcement. I really thought if Brent wanted to leave to go to private service again, which he had indicated to me at times that he'd like to get in the private sector again, that announcement will come after the session, not before. But that being said, Tammy Miller has certainly proved herself well in the governor's cabinet. She's proved herself exceptionally well in the private business sector. I think she's an exceptionally intelligent person, and it will be great working with her in the Senate. It's just a great place to be. I think she'll do tremendous there, and I look forward to working with her, to be honest with you.
You think she has a good relationship with legislators currently? Sorry.
I think that there's a learning curve there for legislators to learn more about her and her to learn more about us. But that happens very quickly when you get into the chambers and you're together for a 4-month period like we are. So.
Just one final question in that vein. I agree with you absolutely in your assessment of outgoing Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford, and of course Tammy Miller, who has a very impressive track record. Everything I know about her is positive. I do know that, again, this is a governor that has at times, I think, struggled to have a good relationship with the legislature. And Brent Sanford, I think, was somebody who was a very good liaison between the two. I mean, obviously he had his constitutional duties to preside over the Senate, but it was more than that. I mean, he was really a go-to guy for Governor Burgum. Can you speak to a little bit? And again, I don't want to make it sound like Tammy Miller's not every bit as capable of doing a good job. But I think for a lot of lawmakers right now, she's a question mark. As you said, I think she's somebody that they're going to have to get to know. So, I mean, speak to that a little bit. To me, I kind of felt, and in no way intending to impugn Tammy Miller, it kind of feels like Governor Burgum's losing a little bit of an asset.
Well, I'll tell you what Brent really brought to the table was he had local political experience as a leader of a community, and he'd been involved in that community in multiple roles. So that closeness to the community and the political experience he brought with him to the legislature, and that was really a big plus with people dealing with him, because he understood how at least local politics worked in North Dakota. When your background is totally business and not necessarily related to anything politically within the communities or within the state, it's a little different environment that you're stepping into. So I think Tammy will be a quick learner. You're right. Brent had all those tools, and that was easier for him. I'm sure Tammy will get there, or I should be saying, excuse me, Lieutenant Governor Miller. I don't mean to use her first name all the time. But
I think technically she's not yet, because I don't think Brent's out officially until January 2nd. I think that's the time.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
So
you're right. Yeah, I mean, yep. So, but when it happens, the long story short is that I think she will do fine. It's going to be a learning curve, and everybody has to get to know each other, and we will do that very quickly in that chamber.
Senator Bekkedahl, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Ben. Have a good Christmas.
Staying in touch with your community through local news and information is the gift that keeps giving all year long. Subscribe to Inforum now and get 50% off an annual subscription for you or anyone on your list. Just call 833-248-7801. That's 833-248-7801.
All right, just finished our interview with Senator Bekkedahl, who had some very gracious. And that's, we finished that interview talking about the incoming Lieutenant Governor, Tammy Miller, and Ben, as you pointed out, when we broke there, the second female Lieutenant Governor in North Dakota state history.
Yeah, and I want to point out the first ever female lieutenant governor was Ruth Myers, who was a representative from Montreal County, who's a social worker. She very tragically was so Governor George Center was elected in 1984 as governor of North Dakota, and she was his lieutenant governor. And then right afterwards, she was diagnosed with lung and brain cancer 2 years into their term, and she died at age 62. Then I have to correct you a little bit, because then Tammy Miller would be the third. I thought you were talking about Rosemary Myrdal, who was lieutenant governor under Ed Schaefer. Oh, I'm very sorry. I completely wiped her from my mind.
We both. You told me that Tammy Miller was the second. I thought you were talking about second behind Rosemary Myrdal. So the third, although maybe at this point nobody should quote us on how many we've had.
Yeah,
now that we've demonstrated our ignorance here.
Well, the last bit I was going to say, just for folks who live in Bismarck, the Ruth Myers Hospitality House, which is a shelter for homeless persons, is named after her. So that's just a bit of North Dakota political trivia there. But I thought it was, so I apologize. I thought it was second. So Tammy Miller, very interesting announcement and very interesting timing. What did you think of when Brent Sanford decided to exit his role?
Yeah, well, first of all, I googled it here real quick. I do believe Tammy Miller is the third, so it would be Ruth Meyer, Rosemary Myrdal, Tammy Miller, third lieutenant governor in state, female lieutenant governor in state history. As for the timing, I think a lot of it, I think people are trying to make a lot of, intrigues between the governor and the lieutenant governor. There's long been rumors about tensions between the two. A lot of times it's hard to say. Was it really a bad thing, or was it? The famous biography of Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet, was called A Team of Rivals. Lincoln purposely surrounded himself with people who would push back and challenge. So, was the tension people were perceiving to the extent that there was any, between Sanford and Burgum, was it a bad thing, or was it by design? Maybe this was a governor appointing somebody who he knew would have a lot of different perspectives than he did. I think Sanford was a very effective lieutenant governor. Not to besmirch previous lieutenant governors, but very, very involved on policy in a lot of areas. For instance, the negotiations around Coal Creek Station, which if it had closed would have been economically devastating to central North Dakota. Lieutenant Governor Sanford was central to that, and in a lot of ways deserves credit for that. He was very central on water issues. So, but in terms of the timing, honestly, I'm inclined, having talked to as many people behind the scenes as I know to talk to, I'm inclined to take his explanation at face value. I think lieutenant governor can be a tough gig. People don't think about this, but there aren't a lot of well-defined roles, so you kind of end up jumping from place to place and filling in gaps. And let's be honest. Ultimately, you're working for the governor. The governor gets to chart the course, and your job is to be a loyal foot soldier. And I don't want to make that sound like Sanford is, was chafing under governor. I don't want to imply anything like that. I think it's just
no, but that's the nature of the role. That's not Brett Sanford. That's the nature
job.
Of being lieutenant governor. That's the nature of being the vice president of the United States. That's it's the nature of being number two. When something's going right, the head guy in charge is there, and we're doing it. If something's going wrong, sometimes, not all the time, and I'm not pointing fingers at specific people here, but oftentimes you're to blame, or you're to need to take up responsibility.
If you think about it this way, and I have no idea if this is the way Brett Sanford thinks about it, but if you think about it, you get none of the credit, right? Because all the credit for the good decisions goes to the governor. But potentially you get to carry all the baggage, because if you want to run for governor in the future, you were part of an administration that did a lot of things. You have a track record that maybe internally you didn't have a lot of say over, but you're sure carrying those suitcases now. So, but
if a columnist or an AM radio host or someone else in the media wants to talk to you about your administration's failures, they're probably more likely to send out the lieutenant governor than the governor, and that's anywhere. That's not North Dakota. Sure. That's not a Doug Burgum thing. That's just how it goes.
I will say that Sanford had applied to get the Bank of North Dakota job, to be president of Bank of North Dakota.
And I didn't know that until I read your column. Yeah, that's very interesting. That's an interesting thing for a sitting lieutenant governor to do.
I think he was looking for he wanted to do something else, right? And I think it's probably unwise to read too much into that in terms of anything other than maybe he's just a person who wanted to do something else.
This is a minor commentary, but I will throw out there. I found the timing to be I'm trying to think of a word that isn't scandalous, but it was odd to me.
Intriguing is maybe the right word. It's
intriguing because, if you're going to leave, if you're looking to leave, you're probably not broadcasting that on your social media, whatever. But the fact that he chose the week before the Christmas holiday to announce that he's going to hang up his spurs the day before legislative session gavels in was what's odd to me about it is, like Senator Bekkedahl indicated, if you're looking to leave, we've got every other year session, 4 months beginning of odd years. He's at the tail end. He's in the second half of his second term as lieutenant governor. Why not just ride the session out as the presider of the Senate, which is the main role of the lieutenant governor, get done with your 4 months, throw the gavel down, sine die, and then say, oh, you know what, I'm going to leave for the private sector. Let's give whomever is going to be here next some time to get used to the role. Whereas here, he seemed to specifically not want to be in the session. But if that was the case, why wouldn't you announce it, I don't know, pre-Thanksgiving, and then the governor rolls out the replacement, and then that new lieutenant governor gets a real chance to know the the chairs and other new legislators coming in during organizational session, because as you said, Rob, this governor's had some tension with legislators, with legislative leadership, even within his own party. Why not pave that road as smoothly as you can?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know the answer for it. I can imagine some possibilities. There may be a job opening for the lieutenant governor that we just don't know about, and maybe this is the timing that worked for him. Also, I don't think we can ignore the fact that Governor Burgum is going to run for a third term. I know he hasn't announced it, and if people asked him,
I completely agree with you.
If people asked him, he would demur. But I mean, everybody internally tells me this is a person who he wants to be in the governor's office. He considers one of the crown jewels of his achievements the Teddy Roosevelt Presidential Library that they're building over in Medora. He thinks
absolutely
symbolically that's a big deal. And I agree with him. I think that is a big deal. I think that's a wonderful
And
project.
he's clearly very proud of it too. He's made it's not like that's a secret. He's very
I think he wants to be
he wants that to be a legacy.
He wants to be the governor at the ribbon cutting. That's going to require one more term.
And that sounds right to me.
So I think he's absolutely going to be. And also, I mean, you look at his legislative agenda. And listen, Doug Burgum is a guy who cares about North Dakota, and he has a lot of ideas for North Dakota. I mean, the man is not short of ideas at all. But this legislative agenda reads to me like something a person wants to campaign on, right? Big income tax cuts.
It's big headlines that you can put on flyers in the mail
care.
That you look at the flyers for 5 seconds before you throw the flyers in the trash, very frankly.
Right.
That's not even really a criticism. That's just reading the tea leaves of how campaigns work. It's actually effective campaigning.
Well, I mean, because I think the way he's going to talk, Senator Bekkedahl talked about it, the way Governor Burgum is talking about his income tax proposals, he's saying, listen, every time we have tried to, I know everybody wants to talk about property taxes, but every time the legislature has tried to alleviate the pain on property taxes, it hasn't worked. And we know that because the legislature keeps doing stuff and we're still talking about property taxes.
And it does open Governor Burgum up run for a third term for someone to sweep in and say, you've been in for 8 years, property taxes still aren't solved. What are you doing about it? You and I can debate the nuance of who levies property taxes all day long. When you're making those last minute decisions the last 2 weeks of a campaign, theoretically, I mean, all this might be for naught given the fact that Doug Burgum has been elected north of 70% both of the last 2 times he ran for office. And I imagine outside of a unforeseen, incredibly strong primary within his own party, I can't imagine what's stopping him from that third
About the
term.
only thing I could think of is Rick Becker tries to run again, and I think Doug Burgum, he's going to chip some away. I think Doug Burgum probably puts up John Hoeven numbers then and probably still gets mid-60s of the vote. You know,
if it's a primary, I can't imagine that going very far.
And if Becker jumps in, let's be honest, too, some of the blooms off that rose. I mean, he was on a statewide ballot for the first time.
Likely,
it did worse than the Democrat. So this idea that he's leading some populist revivalist movement, I think has been diminished.
I'd be interested to see I was interested last year to see what a Rick Becker campaign will look like if he had shown some discipline and kept his nose on the grindstone the entire time. Because he was in, then he was out, then he was back as independent who was calling himself a Republican, and it resulted in exactly what I was expecting it to result in, which was absolutely nothing, a distant third place, and he'll be swept from North Dakota voters' minds for voter ID if he's not running consistently from here on out. But I don't want to get too far down that topic just because I want to mention another thing about the Burgum administration's retention right now of some of the more high-up members. I don't think that we've seen a lieutenant governor voluntarily leave. Like I said, Ruth Myers unfortunately died in office, but I don't think we've seen one voluntarily leave in decades. I want to say we did not see it during the going backwards, Jack Dalrymple, John Hoeven, Ed Schaefer, Bud Sinner administrations. I don't know past that with Alan Olson and Art Link and Bill Guy. So my point there is that he's had different chief operating officers, which is essentially what his chief of staff is. That is not something that was the case previously. Even some of John Hoeven's staffers basically just stayed on and became Jack Dalrymple staffers. I think it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think you could take it one of two ways, which is there a retention problem with the Burgum administration? Or I could see someone in the Burgum circle, in the administration circle, coming back and saying we're victims of our own success. There's enough. Look at the job market now. More and more people are only staying in jobs 2 to 3 to 4 years, especially if you're frankly on the higher end of those white collar office jobs. And we are, as a state, seeing so much economic development. If you're a Brent Sanford, you're talking to a Fortune 500, 100 company on a daily basis, a different one. Like you said, he was part of that purchase of Coal Creek, keeping it alive. How many energy companies are you talking to? How many telecoms are you talking to? When you're encountering that many high up companies, you're going to have people snatching talent here, there, and everywhere else, just like it does in corporate America. So maybe the public sector is just turning into more of what the private sector is like. I'm not certain.
I think if you look at a lot of the people that Governor Burgum brought in, and again, not this is not intended as a slight towards the sort of people that Hoeven and Dalrymple brought in, and I combine those two because you remember, I mean, Dalrymple was obviously one of Hoeven's people, and then moved up when Hoeven ran for the Senate. Yeah. Dalrymple was lieutenant governor. He moved up and then won an election on his own. You know, a lot of those they were political people. I mean, they were government people even before they got in. Burgum brought a lot of people from outside the political sphere into his now Sanford. He was a mayor for a long time. He was kind of a political person, so he's the exception. But you look at a lot of like the people who have run the Commerce Department. A lot of these, they're private sector people who were brought in, and a lot of them are leaving for private sector jobs. Now think about what the state of North Dakota pays for some of these cabinet positions versus what some of these people could command in terms of salary. Tammy Miller, before she was the chief operating officer of, which I always laugh at, Governor Burgum loves him some corporate speak, right? He loves them lingo.
Silicon Valley terminology, and I don't.
The state of North Dakota has never had a chief operating officer before, but we had I'm sure it was some other position. I don't know, what was it, chief of staff or something before? I don't know.
Yeah, it was chief of staff.
Yeah, but now he calls it the chief operating officer. Anyway, it's a name change. It probably doesn't matter that much. Tammy Miller was a CEO. She's the CEO of a big company, Border States Electric. I mean, they're
since 2006 too, right? Not a short term.
They're a big deal. She took a pay cut to go to work for Governor Burgum. And maybe she was already done, and I don't know what I can't read her mind. But she took a pay cut to move from Border States.
She's a smart, accomplished person, and clearly, I'm guessing at this point in her life, it's a compliment to say she probably doesn't need the money. She's doing this because she wants to do it.
Right. Well, and I think clearly she has probably some future political aspirations as well. I mean, we saw her.
Well, she has been explicitly recruited by the state GOP. My understanding was she was being recruited to run against Heidi Heitkamp, and I believe the article I read at the time, I can't remember if it was you or whom.
It was me.
It
was me. Said, maybe other people reported it. I did report it at the time. I interviewed her at the time, but
she didn't want to go through a grueling Senate race, which it would have. I mean, she was right. It was a multi-million-dollar. It was the most. I think it's still the most expensive race in North Dakota history.
It was a vicious one. Yeah, and
it was the most expensive race in North Dakota history. And would she have won? Would she have not? Who knows? Looking at where the tea leaf, where the winds blew, I'm guessing yes, but I don't know for certain. Well, maybe not.
Taking on someone like Heidi Heitkamp, your first time running for elected office, is tough.
There's a lot.
Kevin Kramer's was an old hand, and obviously knew what he's doing. He won despite being outspent by Heidi Heitkamp like 4-1. So,
but yeah, and so Tammy Miller spent many years being the CEO of Border States Electric. That is a big company, and over the time that I'm looking at her profile on there, and they went from a $485 million a year company to a $1.7 billion company over the course of the 15 years that she was there. And I'm sure, this is an older article. I'm sure I'm playing a little bit fast and loose with the numbers. The point is, we went from the millions to the billions with a B with her as an executive of an energy company coming into the lieutenant governor role. Again, the third woman to ever serve in that role. We asked Senator Bekkedahl, what's your relationship like with her? Because again, with the timing of, frankly, very last minute departure on the part of Brent Sanford, I wonder what her relationship will be like with the Senate. And I do want to emphasize, not to de-emphasize her role, because the Senate is so lopsided on a partisan level, I would say right now, with only 4 Democrats out of 47 senators, I would say the lieutenant governor presiding over the Senate is not going to make or break whether a bill passes or not there. So I'll be interested to see. I'll be interested to see what the Burgum administration thinks the role for that lieutenant governor will be, or what she thinks.
I mean, because listen, the lieutenant governor doesn't have to be. The lieutenant governor doesn't even have to preside over the Senate if they don't want to.
I believe they do. I thought, couldn't that go to a senator, to the president pro tem?
Yeah. In fact, it happened regularly. I mean, when the lieutenant governor can't be there.
Okay.
So they don't have to. I mean, it's kind of like, it's like you said, it's like the vice president. The vice president's not usually in the Senate chamber when the Senate's in. They have.
And I was in the House, so I actually didn't realize that, because in my whopping 2 sessions I was in the legislature, Drew Wrigley was at the head of the Senate like clockwork. He did not skip a day.
Memory, and I had to state that because in my column I talked about that Jack Dalrymple my memory was that he didn't preside over the Senate that often. But then I had somebody correct me saying, Rob, your memory's wrong. He was there more often than you think. But I remember when Drew Wrigley, there was some grumbling from the senators that Drew was there so much more than Dalrymple was. Without going back and checking the record, that was my memory, is that Dalrymple would
if Drew wasn't there, I would, in my brain, everyone would have been like calling his house to see if he was okay.
Drew was much more hands-on, I think, than Dalrymple was.
And by the way, I think that's correct. For what, I mean, I'm not the lieutenant governor. I don't get to preside. I don't get to tell Tammy Miller what to do. But I thought the way Drew handled that was the correct way of doing it. Be present. You're there for a reason. You're elected for a reason.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot of duties that are assigned to the lieutenant governor. There's an old joke about what is the lieutenant governor. Why doesn't the lieutenant governor look out the window in the morning? So they have something to do in the afternoon. Is the old joke. No, I say that. Brent Sanford was very busy, but again, a lot of what, I mean, during the session, the lieutenant governor has the constitutional responsibility to preside over the Senate, although they don't necessarily have to be there every day. But other duties are kind of as assigned by the governor. And Sanford, so Sanford's role is kind of being, it wasn't really so much about his official duties as just he had a good relationship with a lot of lawmakers, and could leverage those relationships for the Burgum administration.
And, I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of Tammy Miller in this role with kind of a legislator brain. Now, taking a step back and looking at it from more of a private sector workforce standpoint, I can see Doug Burgum wanting to leverage her as a workforce ambassador to other states, other populations, trying to bring people in the state of North Dakota. You could definitely pick a whole lot worse spokeswoman to represent the state, represent employers in the state, to attract people here. If
you think about it, our governor is one of the most financially successful people in state history. Governor Burgum, who is, I actually asked him, people always say he's I asked him once, he said he's not a billionaire. Now, I don't know if his circumstance, that was several years ago, so I don't know if his circumstances have changed since then. But you can have $900 million and not $999 million and not be a billionaire. But I mean, if you think about it, we have 2 CEOs now as governor and lieutenant governor of two very successful, wildly successful CEOs. So that's interesting.
And actually kudos, because depending on the branch of the GOP that you come from, that is supposedly the goal, is to be running government as a business and running people with business experience. And like I said, it depends on which branch of the GOP you come from, but there's a very strong wing that would explicitly like business people to be the only people in charge of government for a very limited term. And that's what we have here.
The one thing as a conservative, because I do hear people say that, run government like a business. Businesses' goals are to profit. I don't want government. It shouldn't be about profit. Not least because
I hate it.
Where the government gets its revenue is from me, and it's not optional. So I always chuckle when people make that comparison. All right, let's finish up. Let's talk about some of the committee assignments. I had a column this week, and this is really more of it. This is an issue in the House more than the Senate, where and you actually brought, kind of steered me to looking at this as well. But there hasn't been a female chair of a committee in the North Dakota House of Representatives in a decade. There's not going to be this session as things are currently plotted. And the last one was the 2013 session when State Representative Nancy Johnson was the chair of the Political Subdivisions Committee, and she was the only chair of a House committee standing House committee that session. That surprised me, Ben.
And very frankly, from serving there, it did not surprise me. And that's really going to sound like an overly partisan comment, but it simply was not the culture there. I thought Representative Johnson was an awesome chair. That was my first committee I was ever in. She ran it very, very well. And you have to have when you're a chair, you have to have you should have a very calm, very even-handed temperament in order to handle the sheer amount of emotions, personalities, and frankly, egos that present themselves to you, and be able to keep perspective, balancing the fact that really, truly, past the pomp and circumstance, past the amendments and every other procedural, process you have to learn, you're supposed to be doing the work of the people of the state of North Dakota there, not in embodying any kind of pettiness or past, whatever. And she did a fantastic job at that. But like you said, we have not had a woman in the House be a chair there. And we've had several women in the GOP get elected from there who I would consider to be up and comers. Go ahead.
Well, even coming from last session to this session, the chair of the Education Committee last session was Representative Mark Owen from Grand Forks, and his vice chair last session was Representative Cindy Schreiber-Beck. Well, this session, Cindy, I guess you would expect Representative Schreiber-Beck to move up, and I haven't spoken to Schreiber-Beck about this, and I have spoken to House Majority Leader Mike LaFleur about this issue, but I didn't ask him about the Education Committee specifically. Mm-hmm. But Representative Pat Heinert for Bismarck was put up as chair of that committee over her, and she continues to be vice chair. And I spoke with Leader LaFleur. I don't think he's a misogynist. I don't think that he's sitting down, twirling his mustache, trying to think, how do we keep women out of these leadership roles? So I guess, in fact, when I talked to him about it, he said that he was surprised when I told him about it. So I don't know. How does it happen?
And I thought that was an interesting response because, and like you said, we couch a lot of these, just because there's a critique, or even just in this case, pointing out what are facts. That's not a personal critique or accusation of villainy, of villainy on the part of Mike LaFleur, Representative LaFleur, who's a smart person who kind of knows a few of the angles. So clearly that was not prioritized then because he was surprised by it. Now he said specifically to you, I was surprised by it and I shouldn't be. So there's some acknowledgement on his part there, but I think that probably needs to get adjusted for the future. Yeah. Like I said, you have a lot of female members of the House GOP caucus who have been up and comers. There are two, and I'm sorry because I'm not remembering their names, but there are two younger ones in Grand Forks who could move up. And Emily O'Brien, he said was considered for a leadership position, but not. Shannon Roars-Jones and Brandy Pyle in Fargo and Castleton, respectively, I would be considering to be working the way up the ranks.
In Leader LaFleur's defense, Emily O'Brien and Brandy Pyle are both on appropriations, which is also a very
powerful committee,
a consequential committee assignment. So they're not chairs, but being on appropes is a big deal. So I don't want to get too carried away, but to me, I am not.
It's worth pointing out, though.
I am not an identity politics person, as anyone who reads my work knows. I don't like it. I like to deal like you're Ben, right? To me, that matters more. What you've done with your life. How you see the world, your philosophy. I mean, that stuff matters more to me than your skin color or anything else. And to me, that matters with everybody. But I do sometimes in the aggregate, if we're not, something's not adding up. If you look at the Senate side, we consistently over the last decade, which is how far back I looked.
It's actually quite balanced, and I wanted to also call out then the leadership there. Now they have Senator Kristen Roars as the caucus chair of a very large Senate GOP caucus.
Right. So, and Kristen Roars also a committee chair. I mean, the Senate consistently over that decade, most of the sessions had at least three of 11? I think 3 of the 11 standing committees were chaired by women, which is pretty in line with the number of women elected. Which is the other problem. A lot, some of the women elected are Democrats, and the Democrats are not going to get, under a Republican majority, are not going to get chair positions.
They're not going to get chairmanships, and they have a larger percentage in their caucuses.
But it's just, I mean, the Senate Republicans have managed to do it. Why haven't the House Republicans? It's odd. It's worth pointing out. I'm glad Leader LaFleur is aware of it now. We'll see what happens going forward. But that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. Thank you for spending your time with me, and we'll see you all in the new year. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.